Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of How Did We Not Know That? My name is Nat,
My name's Jack.
and today Jack is going to talk to us about another very interesting topic.
Yeah. Okay, so today we're talking about the Mafia.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so to start out, I like to ask, Nat, tell me what you know about the Mafia.
So I feel like my knowledge of the mafia is pretty much based on what I've seen in movies. I feel like I hear a lot about the Italian mafia. Also, like growing up in Chicago, I hear a lot about Al Capone. Um, but yeah, I feel like it's pretty much just like whatever Hollywood has taught me.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, Al Capone is a big guy. We're going to talk about him. But there are multiple mafias. There's like the Jewish mafia, the Mexican mafia, the Italian mafia, the Italian American mafia. So there's a bunch of different types. The Irish mafia, which the head of that, it's weird. There's an Irish mafia. It was like comprised of Irishmen, but then the boss of that mafia was actually Italian. He
Really?
changed his last name to Kelly to sound more Irish. So there are lots of different mafias, but the one that is romanticized a lot in films like The Godfather and shows like that. I don't know if Godfather is like a film or a show. Never saw it, but at
It's
least it's a movie. Okay, yeah. So in Hollywood, the romanticized version of the mafia is usually on the Italian American mafia, and that's what we're primarily going to focus on today. But with the Italian American mafia, it's actually completely separate from the Italian mafia, but it also was started from the Italian mafia. So
Gotcha.
to start off,
Okay, I guess
yeah, it branched off, but then they ended up being kind of separate entities. So that was something that I was finding a lot in my research, was that they're not the same thing. So you should completely like separate the two, but one led to the formation of the other.
Gotcha.
So to go back, we're going to start with the rise of the Italian mafia, which began in the 19th century, which is the 1800s, in Sicily, Italy. So Sicily, do you know where Sicily is?
Is that the boot of
The
Italy?
boot is Italy, but there's like, people call it the rock that the boot is kicking.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so it's that island in the Mediterranean Sea. And so this wasn't actually ruled by like Italy until later on. For a while, it was just constantly ruled by foreign invaders. So tons of people were trying to take it over, like the Phoenicians, the Romans, um, the French, the Spanish. Everyone's trying to have control of Sicily. So
Mhm.
there are frequent violent and chaotic conditions on the island. So what happened was residents of the island started to take like safety into their own hands, and they formed these small clans or groups that would just protect themselves. And so at first, like, the purpose of the mafia wasn't organized crime, but it was just like citizens taking protections into their own hands.
Yeah.
So then they developed their own system for justice, and they started to offer their protections for money from other landowners on Sicily.
Mhm.
Eventually, they started to gain more local power and influence when, after like in 1861, Sicily becomes a province of unified Italy, and they still just take justice into their own hands because the Italian government is still not very organized at that time. So actually, the Italian government and also the Catholic Church will turn to these smaller clans and groups that start to become known as the mafia to help them enforce certain rules on different areas of Sicily.
So even the Catholic Church.
Yeah, even the Catholic Church was involved in using them. And also, like, so what happened was, the government would seek out the mafia's help to catch certain criminals, and the exchange for that was that the government would let them carry out other organized crimes.
Oh,
Yeah, they would just, yeah, they look the other way.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty much how the Italian mafia started to rise. And then we start to get into how they migrated to America. So the first immigrant to come to the United States from Sicily, who was a part of the mafia, is Giuseppe Esposito,
Mhm.
and he fled to New York after murdering 11 wealthy landowners and the chancellor and vice chancellor of Sicilian province.
What?
Yeah. So, and he wasn't the only one too. I think there were 6 other Sicilians who were part of the mafia that fled with him, but he's the first one that came to the United States. And he ended up in New Orleans, so Louisiana, and he continued to do his organized crime situation till he was caught by Detective David Hennessy, who actually caught him and killed him or deported him. Actually, my notes are unclear what happened, but he was caught by Detective David Hennessy. And the mafia gangs in New Orleans and New York are spreading anyways. And so whatever happened to Giuseppe, whether he was killed or deported or just jailed, they wanted to rebel on Detective David Hennessy. So they actually ended up uh, hunting down Detective David Hennessy and killing him. So it's
My
my notes say the gangs murdered Hennessy, who was now the superintendent of the chief of police, on October 15th, 1987. So that was their way of,
Oh, so this is in the 80s. Wow, okay.
yeah. Oh, no, sorry, not 1987. This is wrong. Probably 1887.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
I was like,
Yeah, no, not 1987. Yeah, no, this is in the 80s of 1800.
okay.
So the gangs murdered Detective David Hennessy, and that was their way of getting revenge on him for taking out Giuseppe, who I'm pretty sure was actually a boss of one of the first mafia gangs.
No kidding.
And
Wait.
yeah, one of the first ones. I mean, there's a lot of small gangs, right? So to be like a boss of one is like they're smaller in size. Al Capone, what we think of today with like Al Capone is like a huge, like he was we'll get into it later, but he was like the boss of the Chicago Outfit, which was like the biggest gang in Chicago. And that's after the gangs start to get unified. But during this time, they're all still like kind of small clans.
Wow, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So after they murder Detective David Hennessy, the New Orleans police like step it up. So they start arresting a lot of Sicilians, whether or not they are or are not part of the mafia. They just arrest them and have them tried. So 19 Sicilian men got tried, but they all got acquitted for the crimes that were committed. And then during this time too, because of the mafia, a lot of local citizens started to develop like feelings of Italianism,
Yeah.
and they started to call for more restrictions of Italian immigrants. But an angry mob on March 14th, 1891 formed, and they broke into the prison to uh, basically lynch the men who had been on trial for the murder of Detective Hennessy. And so 11 out of 19 became lynched. And there, a few sources differ, but this has been debated as to one of the largest like public lynchings in American history. I'm sure there's more, but yeah, 11 out of 19.
That's
And they may or may not have been part of the mafia.
wow. That's awful. That's really sad.
Yeah, pretty sad. But then, because of that, the mafia becomes a more discussed dialogue in America.
Oh,
So, yeah, after this, the mafia is still doing their thing for the next 30 to 40 years. And then, when we hit the 1920s, we start to see an increase in immigration and growth in the mafia, Italian American mafia, because back in Italy, Prime Minister Benito Mussolini launches a crackdown on mobsters. So because of that, Benito Mussolini felt like they were going to affect the fascist regime. So they start to really try to like arrest them and stomp down the mafia. So this is why more mafia members start to immigrate to the United States. All right. And then, okay, we have more mafia coming, and the types of crimes that they would commit to make money are still in the realm of traditional crimes. And this is why people say that the American Italian mafia is different from the Italian mafia, because the Italian mafia started for land protections and they basically took advantage of landowners. but the American Italian mafia made money through more traditional crimes like gambling, prostitution rackets, burglary, and extortion, which is getting money through threats. And there's also a very popular, what's it called? A very popular practice called black hand racket. So I don't know if you remember from like those old movies, they'll get like a cryptic note and it's got like those letters like give us money or we'll like kill you or something like that. So that's black hand racketing.
Oh, okay.
And and they would actually send these to ethnic Italians with threats of death or violence.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I don't know why they did it to like fellow Italians, but
Wow. Wait, that's
keeping it in the circle.
so yeah, so just like random people, they would just send a note, be like, "Hey, give us money."
Randomly. Yeah, just random cryptic notes to
Um,
people and try to get money from them. And that's how they made their money.
so
Uh
like because the mafia in Italy was trying to protect like other Italians.
yeah, they started trying to protect yeah, other landowners. Well, they protected landowners in exchange for money, but then they eventually become more violent. But in America, it was very much
Yeah.
doing organized crimes to make money the entire time.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't for protection. And then let me think. Yeah, okay. So there's something I wanted to say with this black hand racket stuff. Mm, nah. Okay. Oh, actually, yeah, no, I know what I was gonna say. So I think I liked looking into their traditional crimes because I think they get very glamorized in the movies of like, oh, the mafia, they're so cool. But this stuff is terrible. Like the prostitution rackets, think about all those like sex slaves that you read about in third world countries or less developed countries. And it's terrible conditions. And that's the same situation. Like pimps are not a cool thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of Italians were running that.
Yeah, you don't
So
really see that in the movies as much. It's mostly just like, oh, I don't know, like threats. Yeah, extortion.
yeah, like they seem like they're just gonna beat up each other and it's fighting, but it's that and a lot more abuse to like women as well. Made me pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But anyways, so 1920 we're getting a lot more mafia growth. And another thing that starts in the 1920s is the prohibition. And the prohibition changed the way the mafia ran for forever. This is where the mafia really, really got rich. So within the first 3 months, $500,000 in whiskey was stolen from government warehouse. And today, that's over $6.4 million in the first 3 months of prohibition. That's what they stole. So they made lots of money through illegal import, manufacturing, and sale of alcohol. This is called rum running or bootlegging. And they would get away with it just by bribing policemen, judges, juries, witnesses, politicians, etc. And that's basically why the mafia was able to thrive, is they made so much money off of prohibition that they could afford to have to pay off politicians. And they had a lot of connections with government as well.
Wow. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's another thing that like I think of when I think of the mafia is like, oh, they're like they have all these deals with like local government officials and like law enforcement. So a lot of like shady, yeah, partnerships.
Definitely. Yeah. And before then, right, the mafia doesn't have that much money. You do make a little bit of money from traditional crimes, but it's nothing like millions of dollars you get from bootlegging. So once they have more money, they definitely acquired a lot more power and influence. So prohibition's happening and the competition for bootlegging is getting really intense. So then we see a rise in turf wars, which is just different types of mafia gangs fighting each other for control of the bootlegging industry. So in New York City, which I would say from my research, there's two really big hotspots. It's New York and Chicago, where the mafia is. And in New York City, the two biggest gangs are Joe Massaria's gang and Maranzano. Salvatore Maranzano. So these are the two big. These names are gonna be the death of me. My grandma would be very, very ashamed. These two gangs are like the main ones in competition. And in February 1930, they have what's called the Castellamarese War. And that lasts from February 1930 to April 1931. And that's just the gangs fighting each other for control of the rum running bootlegging industry. And it finally ends in April 1931 when Masseria is murdered. And then Maranzano, who was the other guy, comes into power. And these turf wars are really violent, and it's really just hurting, gang members. It's not very productive. So Maranzano comes up with the idea to unify the mafia gangs of New York and then establish territory. So now each gang can operate in their own territory and not affect each other, right? So a little bit of collaboration going on. And yeah, like they're really good businessmen, actually. If you look at all the things they do, they're definitely like, as from a business perspective, I was like, this is a good idea. That was a good move. Okay, so Maranzano unifies the mafia gangs of New York into what's known as the five families. And the five families are Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese. And I just want to note that these are not actually their family names. So I looked further into it, and these are definitely not the family's actual names. Like the families that ran these gangs, this is like their code name, because that's dumb. You make your actual last name. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But those are the five families.
Just in case.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're operating under pseudonyms.
Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So now they're unified. And within 6 months of the unification of them, Maranzano is the head of the five families. So they all operate under him, and they all have to pay him a little bit of money. I don't know why, but they're paying him a little bit of money to operate. And Maranzano has a right-hand man named Charles Lucky Luciano. And Lucky Luciano is like evil. This guy is so evil. He's very, very famous. He ends up murdering Maranzano within 6 months, and he then becomes the head of the five families. And actually, so Charles Lucky Luciano. Should I call him like Lucky or Luciano for this? Okay, so we'll call him Lucky for the rest of this. But Lucky, basically, he was under Masseria, which was the Masseria, who is like the one guy, and then Masseria gets murdered, and then he works for Maranzano, and then he murders Maranzano, and it assumes the head of the five families. But Lucky actually was the one who also helped murder the first guy that he was working under, which was so he murdered one of the bosses, then he murdered the second boss that took over, and then now he's the head.
Oh my gosh.
So he's diabolical. So now he's the boss, and he's doing well, makes a lot of money, driven by power and greed, running New York. And in 1936, Luciano finally gets arrested for operating a prostitution ring. And then he's sentenced to 50 years. He only serves 10 and then gets deported back to Italy. Wow. Yeah, so. Mm-hmm. And that's the end of basically Luciano's days. I think that he's still operating remotely in Italy, but
when he goes back to Italy.
Yeah, I think he did something remote. I don't even know who took over after him, because he would have been done in 1936, and the five families are still running today. So I'll get into that at the end, but the Mafia still exists today. They didn't go anywhere.
Mafia, if you're listening, please
don't attack us. All right, so that's New York. Now we're gonna go to Chicago, which is where my Italian family migrated. So at first I thought, oh, maybe my family's a part of the Mafia, but actually, like after doing research, I was like, I pray that they were not at all involved, because this is terrible stuff, and I hope that they never had to go through this. I hope no one in my family committed these crimes.
Yeah.
Glamorized in Hollywood, but they're actually not people at all.
Yeah.
Right. So in Chicago, there's also these turf wars rising up, fight for territories. And there are two gangs that are pretty powerful. One's called the Outfit, and the other one was called the North Side Gang. And in 1929, there is a big event called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Yeah, I've heard of this. I've heard of this.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah, because you're from Chicago. So, like, what have you heard about it? Tell me more.
Just like a lot of people. Isn't it like at a restaurant or something, and then or like a party or something? It's like really public gathering, and then like one gang infiltrates like the other's territory and like kills a lot of people, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So it was the Outfit, which is actually the gang that Al Capone was a part of, which we'll hear a lot about later. But that gang dressed up disguised as policemen, and they went to the Lincoln Park garage, which is like pretty public area, and just lined up the other gang members and shot them all down. So they murdered a
Like,
total of 7 men from the North Side gang. And the worst part about it is no one was charged. So they completely got away from that. The most like bloody massacre
oh my,
you've ever seen. Everyone's unscathed.
wow, what the heck?
It was wild. Right. So then the outfit is the one who won that shootout. And the Outfit is run by Al Capone and John Torrio. And they worked together after that to unify all the gangs in Chicago as one.
Okay.
Yeah. And then so eventually John retires to go back to Italy. And this is when Al Capone, probably one of the most famous mafia members, takes over. So the Chicago Outfit is the name of the gang he's running. And it is probably the most powerful and well-known gang of Chicago. And he basically just does a really good job from a business perspective as well, profiting off of the prohibition, and then later the Great Depression. They made profits off of that. So during his peak, the height of the late 1920s, where they're operating, they have an estimated revenue of 100 million, and that is about 1.4 billion that would be 1.4 billion in 2016. So roughly that in today's terms. And that was all from liquor distribution, speakeasies, beer brewing, gambling, prostitution, and other rackets.
That's insane.
It's a lot of money. Billion with a B. So it's an insane amount of money for that time. And a good thing Al Capone did, though, during the Great Depression was he opened the first soup kitchen in Chicago.
No kidding.
Yeah, so that got me feeling a bunch of different ways. Man of the people, but also murdered everyone.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I didn't. You opened the first.
Yeah, I know. And actually, I'll get into this again, but Al Capone is kind of a calm guy. Like, he didn't really cause too much trouble when he was serving his term. He's not a violent guy. Didn't cause. Yeah, he wasn't. Yeah, I'll talk about this. So basically, his first criminal conviction is in May of 1929, and it was in Philadelphia, where he was caught carrying a concealed weapon.
Oh.
So, right. Yeah, that's it. So that's when he gets criminally convicted. And he's convicted for a year. He gets freed in March of 1930. But then a month later, the Chicago Crime Commission released its first ever list of the city's worst criminals, and Capone is named public enemy number 1.
Oh.
Right. So the nation is like, this guy, not our friend. Everyone look out for him. And I think Herbert Hoover, who was president during this time, was trying to do a crackdown on the mafia as well. So that's why he publicized that Al Capone was public enemy number 1, because he's a very well-known crime boss.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, he's public enemy number 1. In 1931, he gets indicted on charges of tax evasion, which is something I will probably go to jail for one day.
Jack, no.
Literally, like, I was reading this and I was like, wow, maybe I don't want to be related to Al Capone, but wouldn't be surprised, because
This whole time you're
I
like, "Oh, the mafia, they're smart businessmen." Like, I don't disagree.
They're literally, I was like, this is really, they made 1.4 billion in profit and evaded taxes, which I pay my taxes, just like to clarify, I'm not evading them. But if there's any crime I would do, I'm not going to murder anyone. It's most likely going to be tax evasion for me.
Oh boy, now the IRS is gonna
I know, like they're going to audit me and be like, this girl, okay, I file my taxes. Let me say that right now.
clear.
Okay, so yes, he goes to jail for tax evasion and he's sentenced to 11 years in prison and fined 50,000 USD, which is only about 700,000 USD in today's terms.
But like compared to how much money he's been like profiting, like
Right, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not anything. So he first serves in Atlanta for 2 years. And this is why I was like, he's a calm dude. So from what I've read on his time serving in Atlanta, he didn't cause much trouble. He kind of just served his term very quietly until he was sent to Alcatraz in 1934.
yeah,
And
that's right.
yeah, Alcatraz. And they said too that since he didn't cause any trouble, they think sending him to Alcatraz was more of a publicity stunt. For
Yeah.
like the worst people get sent to Alcatraz and like Al Capone to Alcatraz. But he was a calm dude. And so he's in Alcatraz from 1934 until 1939, where he's released. So he only served about 4.5 years in Alcatraz, in addition to like his 2 years in Atlanta. So he didn't serve the full 11 years. And he was released because he was suffering from syphilis. So he was in really bad shape. Yeah, mentally, physically not doing well. Yeah, and he ends up going to a house that he bought in Florida and kind of just playing cards. So the end of his days, when he finally dies from a heart attack in 1947, and has been buried in Chicago.
Wow. Is it like a marked grave? I wonder.
It should be. It should be like a famous. I'm surprised you haven't heard of it. I was gonna say, I guess like maybe people would know about it.
I feel like I should know this where it's at.
Yeah,
I'll look it up.
it's probably a close by cemetery. But yeah, and by the time he died, he would have amassed a net worth of $100 million, which is 18.6 billion in today's,
Oh my gosh.
right? So they are.
I can't like comprehend that much money.
I know, right? I was like, Lord, if I could make $1 billion in my lifetime, I feel really accomplished.
Well, Al Capone
Okay.
way, so I mean,
I know, I'm very, very torn because I'm like, Al Capone, not a good guy. But then again, I admire the soup kitchen, I admire the business, tax evasion. I have to say, I don't admire people like, I'm impressed with it.
yeah, well, it's a black and white situation.
It's true. It's true.
But it is
All right.
that's for sure.
It is. Yeah. Pay your taxes. Um, so I wanted to go into how they got rich after the prohibition because it kind of gets interesting on their interest rates. But after the prohibition, they continued doing sales of other illegal drugs because things like cocaine are still illegal, heroin. I don't know if they sold heroin, but they're selling other illegal drugs. They do a lot of gambling. Later on, they will open up a lot of casinos. This is like later generations of the mafia have done this, and they operate casinos. They still do prostitution rings. And then during the Great Depression, they were huge on loan sharking because they had so much money. So what they would do is a lot of people and businesses couldn't get loans. So they would take the money that they got from bootlegging and start lending that out at really high interest rates. And the rates were about 20% plus. But get this, that interest rate that the mafia was charging, that is the interest rate on my credit card right now, is 20% plus. Yeah. And it's very similar to what credit card companies will charge overspenders with bad credit. And I don't overspend and I don't have bad credit. I think they just update because I'm always on time. So it's like if I mess up, they can profit. But credit card companies and the mafia, very similar.
Oh,
Yeah. So
modern day.
literally, Modern day mafia is
Modern day
credit card.
yeah.
That could be what they're doing today. Is they're just operating credit card places. So
I don't want to get in trouble.
right. So basically pay off your credit cards is what I'm saying. And if you didn't pay off your credit cards or your loans from the mafia, they would inflict self-harm on you. Not self-harm. They would inflict harm on you. And then they would also take a percentage chunk of your business, which is another good business move, to take a chunk of someone's business.
But no, I feel like I hear like, oh, that business is run by the mafia and they control this whole like meat packing industry and shipping industry. That's probably, is that how it happened? Is like they kind of acquire all these?
Yeah, they acquire partial bits of other businesses. And I do have an interesting fact that eventually, I don't think this was in the 30s, I think it was in the 50s, but eventually the five families in New York became so powerful that government officials couldn't build or do any construction without consulting the mafia first. Because if it would affect their businesses or something, you'd have trouble. Yeah. So
Wow.
that's how much power they had. Hopefully that wasn't in the 50s, but I from my memory of that research, I think it wasn't in the 30s. So
That's
okay. Yeah. And then they also may or may not have kidnapped Charles Lindbergh's infant son for $50,000 ransom.
oh yeah. There's so much like conspiracy theories about
Could have been them. I feel like that's 100% likely. Very unfortunate. If you're not familiar with that story, Charles Lindbergh's infant son gets kidnapped and he pays the ransom for $50,000, but then later they find his infant son is dead.
Yeah.
It's really sad.
That's right. There's a lot of different theories about that one, man. That's a wild.
Might not have been the mafia. If it wasn't the mafia, I'm sorry. I'm just delivering news. Yeah. All right. And so today, like I said, the mafia is still in operation. They're estimated that in 2002, the mafia made at least 50 billion a year. And so in 2020, 18 years later, who knows how much they're making? There's still about 3,000 members left, mostly in Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York City. You probably passed a mafia member.
If you're listening, I'm a friend. Please
Friend, foe.
oh.
Yeah. Today they also, again, another good business tactic. They outsource a lot of their work, which is great. Like, you're trying to start a business, outsourcing your work is like, you're really running efficiently. So they'll outsource to biker gangs and other organized crimes. I didn't realize biker gangs were organized crimes. I thought they were just people that liked to ride bikes together.
I think there's like varying like intensities. I think there are definitely like biker like gangs where they're like they do a lot of illegal stuff. But then I think they're all are just guys who like to ride their motorcycles together. So if you see like people on the highway, like, don't automatically assume the police, but no.
Yeah. No, lots of discoveries as to the organized crime world that you did not know existed. Anyways, yeah, and the only thing that kind of unifies the mafias is this thing called the Omerta oath.
Okay.
And that is basically an oath that's like, if someone asks you questions, don't talk. If they ask you questions and you know something, don't talk. If they ask questions and you don't know something, don't talk. Just always don't open your mouth. And that's the oath that mafia members take.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the commission, which is in, what is the commission? I think the commission is the New York. Let me look this up real quick. Right. Okay. The commission is the New York. So when I talked about Lucky Luciano, who is the head of the five families, that ended up being called the commission. So the commission, which is that New York collection of families, yeah, that's still reported to exist. And its current membership, though, is only comprised of the five families and the Chicago outfit. So,
wow.
And I'm certain, too, that they're profiting off of COVID-19 stuff at the moment.
Gosh, they have like like a face mask ring.
right? When everyone's buying up face masks and like price gouging, I was like, who would do this? And now I'm like, the mafia would probably be into that.
My gosh.
hmm
Wow, that's yeah, I guess I never like yeah, that's crazy though, because I guess I assumed like, okay, maybe there's still like smaller mafias today, but you said in 2002 they were making like billions of dollars still, right? So like
hmm
I didn't realize that the mafia is still making so much money and is so like so powerful today because you don't really hear about it. I feel like now there are just so many like just
hmm
stuff that we have to worry about, and so maybe because of that, like
Definitely, yeah. And the thing is too, right? I talked about how they started operating casinos, and casinos make a lot of money
yeah,
in Vegas. And if they're still existing today and evading taxes or
what
anything, so with all that money they made in the prohibition, I'm sure they're using that to
um,
continue.
I wonder why we don't talk about it as much anymore though, you know?
It's a
Like
hush hush thing. We also glamorize it too much in Hollywood. This is crime. This is not good. You're taking advantage of like helpless people, and we make it seem really cool, but it's not.
yeah, it's not cool, guys. Don't join the mafia.
Don't be a part of it.
That's our official stance.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the mafia in a nutshell.
So interesting. I love it. Great job. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem. Pay your taxes and pay off your credit cards.
Join the mafia. Thanks for listening.